guilty, not guilty, 10
Charles
times.
Manson, described today by the star witness
Jury
again.
in the so-called Night Stalker case reached its verdict today.
Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of
The woman
murder.
suspected of shooting Selena is still holding police at
Music
bay.
producer Phil Spector was convicted
In
Monday.
Los Angeles, a killer the police are calling the Hillside Strangler.
Do you find that Mr. Depp has proven all the elements of defamation? Answer, yes.
Welcome back to LA Legal. I'm Leanna. We have Nima over there on the corner, and today we have a very special guest, Anna. So tell our viewers and listeners very briefly what you do. You just started your own practice, so tell us about that, and we'll get started.
I did criminal defense for about a decade. I've worked at the prosecutor's office, and then I did private defense work at a firm in the Valley. I moved to Maryland, and there I practiced in D.C. and Maryland, personal injury and corporate law, which is a memory I like to forget. And when I moved back, I did civil defense work for various insurance companies, and I just went out on my own. So I do personal injury cases, and I do criminal defense, both state and federal.
Anna, we're so happy to have you, back in California and here on LA Legal. In fact, you're so important, you actually bumped me to the corner.
This is now the second time. And funny, so that's Nima's hot spot, right? And so the only other time he's had to move over was Christina was here. And you guys are friends, so it must be. Did she tell you to do this?
I asked her, I said, what do you think? And she's like, oh, you're going to have a lot of fun. I did it. And then I heard her episode and it was awesome. So
awesome. Well, we're glad. This is your first podcast?
It is.
Okay. Yeah. Well, welcome. I hope you enjoy it. So for all of you viewers and listeners, how could we get through this season without talking about the one and only OJ Simpson? So let's take it away. I'll do a quick intro and then you guys jump in because there is a lot to talk about. So OJ Simpson, born on July 9th, 1947 in San Francisco. He was one of 4 children, was raised by his mother and his parents. Fortunately, they were separated, but he lived with his mom. OJ grew up in the housing projects where he joined a street gang early in his teen years. He was arrested 3 times and briefly incarcerated at the San Francisco Youth Guidance Center. Simpson ended up going to USC, where he had a very successful football career, which led him to play professional football. He played for the Buffalo Bills and then eventually for the 49ers. Obviously, his love life was complicated. He married at age 19, Marguerite Whitley. They had 3 children together, and then, of course, he met and fell in love with Nicole Brown.
There was some overlap there, so let's just make sure we talk about that.
Yes, yes. So the story goes that he met Nicole Simpson at a breakfast joint, and coincidentally, the night before, he and his former wife had decided that they're going to go their separate ways, even though she was pregnant. So if you believe that story, you believe it. If not, then not. It's up to you. So let's take it away. Where do you guys want to start with this thing?
Yeah, let's do it. Obviously, I believe that story like I believe that OJ is looking for the real killers. So I don't believe it at all. But, there's so much to talk about. I'm so glad Anna's here because we're talking about the DA's office, which probably lost in a really bad way the biggest case of our lifetime. This is bigger than Johnny Depp, Amber Heard, bigger than any case we will possibly see. I don't care if Brad Pitt and Angelina go at it. This involves race. This involves sex. This involves police officer misconduct in our hometown of LA. It's
celebrity, this case has it all. And so I feel like it's one of those cases that you probably learn about in high school. I don't know, but I feel like I've read about it in college, law school. People are still talking about it. He's come out with was trying to come out with a book. He's just never going away.
He did.
Yeah. Did he come? Was it published? I don't think.
If I Did It, I think it was called.
So he did it, and then the money apparently was going to go to the Goldmans, who, by the way, O'Melveny's Dan Petrocelli sued them civilly and won. So the fact that he could win the case when Garcetti's DA's office couldn't, there's just so many things to talk about here.
Yeah. Did they stand a chance against the Dream Team?
I really thought they did. I think there's many things they could have done differently. So I'll start criticizing, which you guys know I like to do. So I'm going to put on my former prosecutor hat because I wish I still was a prosecutor.
I'd love to hear what you would do different, because I think that there's so many. I don't know if it was just, everyone talked about this mountain of evidence, right? We have a mountain of evidence, and they probably did. But what they did with it is where things went south, right? the jury didn't buy half their stuff, and I have some quotes from the jury. So let's just jump into it.
Yeah, let's just start. They had a mountain of DNA evidence only. That is not enough. In the 90s, when this was like before CSI, now everyone knows what DNA is. Look, jurors are 12 people that are too dumb to get out of jury duty. I mean, really? So you're going to expect them to understand DNA evidence, and you're going to rely on that? I mean, there's so many things the prosecution did wrong.
Yeah.
Let's just start with, I mean, obviously, look, you have racist cops, but we got to start with the background of, this is post-Rodney King, right? This is after the LA riots. This is after 4 police officers were acquitted of civil rights violations. So, I mean, racial tensions in LA were at an all-time high.
Well, yeah, the climate that you try a case in is very, very relevant. And you have multiple things moving at the same time. It wasn't just the incompetence of the DA's office. It was the climate that they were trying the case in. It was the team that they were up against. You're looking at what was categorized as the dream team. You have F. Lee Bailey, who is absolutely brilliant, a master cross-examiner. You have Cochran, who does civil rights violations. So this is exactly in his line of, like, you know, this is his language. You have Dershowitz, you have Kardashian, you have Shapiro, and you have endless resources and funds. And so, you know, the DA's office had an uphill battle. What initially looked like a decent case because, you know, DNA evidence is awesome. It's all over. OJ was everywhere in the crime scene. And if you're not innocent, if you're innocent and you're not involved, there's no reason you should have your blood all over
a crime scene. There's
exactly
3 traces of DNA.
Initially,
and,
it looked okay, but the prosecution, I don't think they stood a chance, honestly. Marsha Clark was considered one of their best. She had, an 18 out of 19 wins or 19 out of 20 wins. And the DA's office, they do keep track of their conviction records, and she had a fairly high one. So should they put their best? But
she also wasn't
forward.
likable, right? A lot of the jurors said that they just, to quote them, they thought she was a bitch. People just did not, and I think that plays into it too, right? You have to, when you're just a layperson, right? You're a juror, like Nima said. You're now stuck. Which, by the way, when I was in law school, I was working at for the OC District Attorney's Office, and I was in the DNA unit. I remember one of the trials, I sat, like where I was sitting was right by the jury, and they were presenting all this DNA evidence and whatnot. And I remember I looked over, and these people were just bored out of their mind, right? And so this is a case I had worked on, and even I was like, man, this is tough. These are people who are just like, you know, like teachers, I don't know, like just random people who don't understand science, right? And so they're sitting there trying to understand what these people are presenting. And so and I felt like, for the most part, it was coming in one ear and going out the other. So when we're talking about DNA, I agree with you. I don't think it really resonated with the jury.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about experts that go on and on and on. They're testifying for days. Those jurors tuned out. But let's talk about Marsha Clark and some of the decisions that she made, which cost them what I thought would have been an easy guilty verdict in this case. And look, we know that OJ's a celebrity. Jurors, especially in LA County, love celebrities. So you got to make sure you have an ironclad case. Mistake number 1 was where they filed. You had a choice to file in Santa Monica. Let's be honest. Older, more educated, whiter jurors. But you chose to file in downtown LA. Going to be a very different jury pool here. Look, as civil plaintiffs attorneys, we love downtown LA. You know, you'd rather be here than the west side. But if you're a prosecutor and you have a case that involves race, it involves scientific evidence, you want a more conservative jury, you know? And for Garcetti to file downtown because he was worried about security, this is OJ, man. Like, the entire world knows who he is. What is he going to do? He's going to, like, shoot his way out of the courtroom? Mistake number 1, in my opinion, was where they filed, because you get a very different jury pool.
But a lot of the bigger cases end up there.
Let's talk about her jury pool, right? She was advised by their analysts and their experts to not get Black female jurors, right? Because they're going to be more sympathetic to OJ. And
very important. So I think Marsha Clark kept thinking that this case was about sex, you know, domestic violence, you know, women are not going to like OJ. Yeah, women might not like OJ, but Black women and white women are very different. And you had a jury, I think it was 10 women. You know, so the defense realized that, like, look, this is about race. You know, that's the most important. I'm not saying you're going to, you know, violate the Constitution and have racially motivated strikes, but you can't expect Black women to view the case in the same lens as a white woman when really it's a case about an interracial relationship. And that's something that they may have feelings about in a way that a white woman would not.
I think they tried to balance it out by bringing Darden into it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we also talk about this, right, in some of our sexual assault cases, right? Women are far more, they're harder on women than men are, right? So you get 10 women on your jury, it's already an uphill battle, like you said. And so, she was convinced, and then this is what I also read up on yesterday, that Marcia Clark was convinced that she has been so good historically in her trials at building like a good, relationship and with the jurors, that she just completely disregarded this advice, and she said, nope, I'm going to put women on this because this is a good case, and I know I can flip them, and I think that really bit her in the butt.
I mean, but hindsight is 20/20. If you think about it, that's not a really bad decision. You're looking at an abused woman. I mean, the underlying theme here that I think is not talked about so much is the amount of domestic violence that Nicole Brown had to endure in her relationship with OJ. And the phone calls, they were recorded. It was all memorialized, and they played it for the jury. Unfortunately, it did nothing. And you can't think of that as a woman. You can't think that another woman could possibly hear that there's a victim going through this type of abuse and not be moved. But it ended up being, it was just overshadowed. It wasn't, I believe one of the jurors said we didn't think it had anything to do with anything.
Exactly. And so that...
it was one of the jurors that was excused me. And in fact, I think one of the mistakes Marcia Clark made was, I would have spent the majority of the time talking about the abuse instead of, focusing on the DNA evidence and the lab and all that, because, I think the jurors would have really disliked OJ if more time was spent on the abuse. And that's frankly one of the big differences in the civil case, and something Patricelli did.
Well, they started off that way, right? They started their trial with talking about the domestic abuse, and then somewhere it just completely steered into this whole DNA mountain of evidence and whatnot. So they started on the right.
They had an opportunity to see the trial play out in real time, and then it's like a second bite at the apple. You get a chance to make different mistakes or make different choices.
Oh, the civil case you're talking
right.
Yeah.
So and also the burden of proof in civil is by a preponderance of the evidence. You're not looking anywhere near beyond a reasonable doubt.
Look, I get it. Totally different standard, totally different jury pool, different case. People were outraged, but how often do you get a 12-0 acquittal in a murder case?
In 4 hours after 37 weeks.
And then how often do you get, even in civil cases, right? It just has to be 9-3. They got 12-0, and they knocked it out of the park. More than a $33 million judgment. So it's not like it was close on the civil side, 9-3, very different result. And I think a lot of it had to do with really how the case was trialed and the focus on the case.
So what would you say was the biggest mistake, right? Because I think we all kind of know, but where would you guys think was the biggest mistake the prosecution made? Was it someone that they put on the, I'm sorry, this is just going to happen today. Was it someone that they put on the stand? Did they fail to do something? What do you guys think?
I'll say the case was lost at jury selection. I mean, you can't have a case that involves, talk about Kyle Rittenhouse, talk about George Floyd, talk about any of the big cases that are happening that are really all about race. I mean, you pick the wrong jury, you're never going to convict Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd, And the jury that they got in Kyle Rittenhouse, look, they thought he was acting in self-defense. Any of these big cases around the country, Ahmaud Arbery, I mean, race is such a big issue, and it was just something that I think the DA's office lost sight of.
Right, I agree. How about you?
I don't know. I never saw it as where the DA's office made a mistake so much as I just thought that they were outmaneuvered in every way. I think they were up against a team that they didn't stand a chance. And what you had with what the dream team ended up doing with the case was magnificent. Yeah. I mean, their theory, the motive, you can, as a defense attorney, one of the detectives said, and I think it's interesting, if you don't attack the investigation and you don't attack the way that the cops went about doing their work, then you're inept. It's not just the theory itself, it's the way that they played it out that was absolutely brilliant. You can turn around and say a cop planted the evidence as much as you want, but unless you can establish motive, that's not going to go anywhere. Even if you select a jury pool that's not in your favor. In my experience with jurors, is they're fairly bright. right. They're listening to you. They might not understand all the nuances of, whatever, mechanical engineers getting up there and DNA evidence and criminalists just kind of boring them. Obviously, it's your job as an attorney to try to present your evidence in a way where you're not having the jurors nod off. But assuming that's the case, they're listening to you and they're watching you and trying to muster BS through them, I find is hard. And the way that I think OJ's team did it was absolutely brilliant. I mean, two things stood out to me. One was the fact that they found Furman's tapes from North Carolina, which till this day, we don't know how they did it, because we all know that in the early 1900s, the Supreme Court said you cannot have state subpoena jurisdiction over another state. So California subpoenas are meaningless in North Carolina. And that was in the possession of some writer or some author. And you know how they are with their own, you can't get anything from them. So it's unclear how they got it, whether it was questionable means or not, or a subpoena in North Carolina that would require, pro hac vice local counsel showing that it was material. Of course, there'd be a paper trail, which after all these years we would have seen. So we still don't know that. The other thing was in OJ's case, which was fairly unusual. I mean, there's a lot of unusual things in that case, but the jury actually had a chance to go to the scene of the crime. You don't see in many cases where jurors get up out of the box and are taken and say, this is where it happened, almost like a side inspection. And obviously, the defense team knew, and they had an opportunity, and this outraged the prosecution's office, which naturally it would. And again, they didn't see this and they didn't think of it. They went and they set up OJ's house in a way that made him so much more pleasant. And it's the little things, the trophies were everywhere. The house was so warm. They staged it, right? They staged it, and it was beautiful. And it's like, how do you not anticipate this from the team that you're working with, right? And it was just all these little things.
See, for me, it was the Furman, right? They put him on the stand, and he testifies, and all is,
and he lies.
All is great until they find out that
he invokes.
Exactly.
And then he invokes, and then he's gone.
Right. And so after that, I mean, how do you, even if you were ahead, how do you get that jury back? So for me, that was the turning point, is his testimony, not his testimony per se, but those tapes that then, basically
Furman played into their hands. And he was the perfect detective in a case like this. If, as a defense team, this is what you want to do with it, you want that type of detective with that type of a history, because it falls right into your theory that he planted all this. Either he's a sneaky, conniving, dirty cop, and the rest of them are complete bumbling idiots, as they said. And together you have essentially the worst investigation you can in a double homicide, which they charge with special circ. And I don't even remember the last time that the DA's office has charged a murder case with special circumstances.
Those are two victims, right? So they were going to go for first degree. But I agree with you completely. I mean, you're talking about, at best, Furman's a racist asshole, and at worst, he's an
absolute
imbecile.
But he's also the guy who, he shows up to OJ's estate, right, at 5 a.m.
Jumps the fence.
He jumps the fence. So now you have an illegal search on your hands, right? Like, they knocked on the door, nobody opened.
The judge found that it was permissible because of the whole exigency of, like, someone's dying behind closed doors.
They thought it was another crime scene. Sure, fine. But he's the one who jumps the fence. He's the one who discovers the blood on the Bronco, and he also finds the gloves.
And you saw the way that the defense attorneys established the finding of the glove through the cross-examination of the 4 detectives, which, by the way, 4 detectives leave the actual scene of a gruesome murder to go to a celebrity's home and only jump the fence after they find the blood print.
But the purpose is to notify him of his wife's death.
Which in the history of their office has not been done in person. Even the parents were notified telephonically. And what I think Cochran did, which I thought was brilliant, was he planted the seed to the jury that when he was cross-examining the rest of the detectives at the scene, that they all lost sight of Furman for a while, which gave him the opportunity, which again would be wild if you think about it in a different case and different, but it just made sense this way.
Well, at the very least, it feeds into the cross-contamination, right? Maybe he didn't plant it, but if he's running around between 2 crime scenes and then they discover the drop of blood and they're like, oh, well, now this is a crime scene. How do you know where that drop of blood came from?
Well, and the way the criminalist did his job, it was all on video. How many murder scenes do you have where the investigation and the collection of evidence is on video? The criminalist is walking around waltzing with no gloves. Even on TV, we see them wearing gloves. They're supposed to get a splatter on the back of the gate. Takes them 3 weeks. Yeah. Who knows what that is at this point?
Yeah, and that's defense lawyering 101. sloppy investigation, rush to judgment. You know, I mean, the best defense is a good offense, and really, it was a clinic by OJ's defense team. I mean, they just destroyed LAPD. I don't think they've recovered to this day.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Well, what do you guys think about their strategy to also rush to trial, right? I mean, they were just, defense team, pushing for an early trial.
That's,
and so
generally a common tactic. They like to do that. It was in a recent case that I heard actually with the United States Attorney's Office where I think they try to rush the prosecution to get their ducks in order. And it's more effective in paper trail cases because it's so much harder to bring all that together. But anytime you rush a prosecution, which you'll know, most government agencies are limited in their resources.
Sure.
So, you know, they're never going to get an expert as good as yours. You're going to get the cream of the crop. They're going to get the best they can have that works with the county. And I think rushing them and forcing them to drop everything and put their ducks in order to prepare for a trial as big as this one was a tactical move.
It was a good one, too. And,
Yeah.
you know, I think it highlights the difference between a reactive case and a proactive. Obviously, DA's office is reacting to a double murder. In a proactive case, most good prosecutors, I mean, they know that once they get that grand jury indictment and they arrest the target, that clock's going to run. So you better be ready to go when you have a choice of when to indict the case. Obviously, the DA's office didn't. And then the defense asserting their speedy trial rights,
Right.
I mean, really kind of put them behind the 8 ball.
Yeah. I think they waived prelim, didn't they?
I think, no, there was a prelim, because I remember the prelim judge wasn't.
Oh, no, they waived the DNA hearing.
The DNA testing.
Yeah. Well, this trial really gave us, I mean, so much. Can we just talk about the Bronco chase, right? Probably the most, watched moment on television
Oh, by
history.
the way, another thing Marsha Clark didn't do, in every jurisdiction in this country, flight is evidence of guilt.
Yeah.
Put in evidence of the fleeing. I mean, what are you thinking? She thought people were going to feel sympathetic because of OJ's mental health issues.
Everything he did was evidence.
Right.
Of
And so that was going to
How
lead me
about
to the next
boarding a
one.
flight?
Yeah, but she
they
didn't
didn't
introduce
present the fact that they found the mustache, the passport, the
Oh, that was
cash,
hilarious.
none of that was presented at trial. Why?
Marsha Clark.
Or what about her? What did she even present an argument as to why the glove didn't fit?
I don't know what the.
There was an argument made, and I'm not a forensic expert by any means, but there was an argument made that in preservation of evidence, for example, freezing a glove evidently was an issue, and you bring somebody in that's gonna say, look, this happens.
No, they didn't. I mean,
the leather shrinks, the blood makes it this, and so or maybe he strategically wore small gloves so he could, he's smart enough to go murder 2 people. He's gonna be smart and take a flight to Chicago. Maybe he deliberately chose. What about the hat? I mean. It's just, it was an overwhelming amount of evidence pointing the finger to one single suspect. It wasn't that outrageous for the officers or the investigators to assume there's nobody else.
I agree.
It was just the way that they did it that gave the defense team so much to work with.
I really think there's one other case that I can think of that makes my blood boil like this one, where I'm like, how did you guys get it so wrong?
Casey Anthony.
Casey Anthony.
Oh
Nima knows. I talk.
No, we've never talked about it, but I think it's the case that.
Where,
she wrote a
how
book
did
too.
jurors get it so wrong, where there's no other evidence to even suggest that anyone could have been
that
present?
case was just awful.
Should we do that case next on LA Legal?
I really think we should.
All right, team, you heard it.
Please make a note of that. It's one of my favorite, and now she's coming out on the Peacock Network. I don't know who's giving her a platform to
That's
give
the thing
her
I
side
can't
of the
stand,
story.
is giving people like that a platform. It's just, we can't all just collectively agree not to do that with people.
No. Look, I
We're
hate her,
sick.
but even
not us, but
yeah.
the American people. I mean, they're obsessed with this.
Well, let's talk
the
about
Bronco
media,
chase
right? I
was
mean,
like,
look, people
like-
were cheering him on. I mean, I was
Yeah, they were
watching the
standing in the
footage last
sidelines,
night,
yeah.
and they were standing on the overpass.
Well, this
with
was
signs.
pre-trial.
Yes, but just people get really immersed in these, crazy, situations, right? And then the media just blows it out of proportion. Granted, media back then was not what it is now. I mean, imagine in today's
my
day
God.
and age on social
Yeah,
media if this
the
happened.
TikToks, the memes.
The TikToks,
Oh,
the
it would've been
memes. I
hilarious.
mean, you know it, Nima. How long were you doing TikToks
And
about
even
Amber Heard
though-
for?
Seriously?
And even though they sequestered the jury, which again, another really rare thing, it's far too expensive. Can't think of the last time that I had heard it or seen it being done as sequestering a jury. And the media still played a really big role. And I think there was like this huge discrepancy between the way LA Times are reporting, and you know how reporters are, and you're going to report it a certain way, and then there was the Sentinel.
Right.
And it was just...
Yeah. Well, what do you guys think would have happened had this been, let's say, taking place a year ago? Right now we have TikTok.
I think there's no one. And we've talked about it a lot, about like serial killers and stuff. I don't think you can get away with this stuff now because law enforcement is so much better. I'm sure OJ's search history would have been
DNA,
like,
the DNA evidence. I was just, I had gone to my former boss's jury trial, and they were presenting some DNA evidence, and it was overwhelmingly boring. However, the way that the lab technician was explaining it, percentage-wise, about, you know, blood prints or like saliva being on a certain, it was interesting. It was interesting for me, but the jurors were not losing sight of it. And nowadays, I think when you explain, you know, 1 out of 10 to the 29th times 1 million, right? You just realize like, whoa, there is no chance that this person didn't do it. And then, because it was so new, DNA evidence and, you know, preservation and whatnot back then, and the criminals are doing wild things like going in gloveless. Here, now you can have somebody explain, like, even if it were contaminated, there's a statistical probability, or it's highly unlikely that it would be somebody else's blood. You know what I mean? Like, they were unable to explain that. Like, okay, maybe it wasn't properly collected. Right. Maybe the chain of custody was lost, which is an issue all on its own. You know, a vial with blood in the pocket of an investigator is unheard of, right? But now I think that there would be an easier way, or at least an ability for the district attorney's office or any prosecutorial agency to explain that. Like, yeah, maybe that happened, but it wasn't going to change the outcome.
Well, let's talk about this, like, sheer incompetence, right? Because how did the LAPD of all police departments get away with who knows how many other cases that they've completely botched because of mishandling, right? And so how like, who oversees these detectives, right? Is at any point in time is someone saying, put your gloves on, or just, how does this happen, Nima? You were in the DA's
I know it well. So, you know, after Rodney King, after OJ, the city of LA created an independent commission, the police commission, to oversee LAPD because it was such a hot mess. It's gotten a lot better. But, I mean, obviously, look, it's a very different area. We talked about DNA. I think it's well accepted. I think folks are a lot more careful right now. But think of all the other evidence that there would be implicating OJ. We talked about search history, his cell phone. They know exactly where he is. It'd be cell site evidence.
Cell site records,
Yeah, of course.
You can pinpoint you.
Yeah, the Bronco's GPS. We know, like, literally where it was, when it pulled up back to his house. I mean, there's so much. I mean, there's cameras everywhere.
Yeah.
Literally. You think in Brentwood, one of the most expensive parts of LA, there'd be, like, Ring cameras. Everyone has cameras.
He'd be on the back of somebody's TikTok.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think we're going to see these types of cases anymore.
Oh, definitely not. It's not going to be tried that way.
Because law enforcement has a significant advantage right now. Just in terms of technology, it's really changed the game.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I still can't, but, you know, at the root of it is, you know, 2 people died, LAPD royally messed up, and again, it's like, yeah, they've gotten better, but how many people have lost loved ones to, like, murder or crime or whatever, and LAPD, because of their behavior or lack of uniformity or whatever. Sorry. They completely lost the cases.
Yeah, I would hope that LAPD has learned from its mistakes. Licks its wounds, something like this won't happen again. But with George Gascon, you never know.
But, you know, there's also this other side to it that, you know, obviously the victims' families will believe this. Most of the investigators would, you know, that were involved in the case did say in their interviews, like, they didn't really think that the errors were that egregious. Every crime scene, I believe one of the detectives, I want to say it was Lang or Phillips, that said, every crime scene is contaminated to a certain degree. This is all, you know, these are humans. They're not robots. They're going to do something wrong. You know, they're going to make small mistakes. And when you listen to the victim's family speaking, they thought that none of that really was a factor. Because if you think about it now, you know, in retrospect, you're like, I mean, it was all his blood. It was all his evidence.
Look, the way I see it, simplified, you have 2 dead bodies, 3 traces of DNA, 2 of them belong to dead people. 1 of them is OJ. I mean, like, there is no shred of, excuse me, like, okay, well, maybe the neighbor or, somebody was there at the same time. There's just no evidence to put someone else near the scene at any time.
There was a theory it was his son.
Yeah.
That was the wildest one. They're looking at his history. Well, yeah, I don't remember his name anymore, but there was one highly recognized private investigator, all circumstantial, which, considering that OJ, the evidence was all there and he was still not convicted, but his was based entirely on circumstantial evidence that the son had a history of violence. Q and OJ's history of, domestic violence, but he had a history of violence. He had a history with knives, and he was diagnosed with some sort of disorder that he was like rageful, and he was off his meds at that time. And that OJ's DNA was at the crime scene because he went to save his son. A completely wild conjecture, but it was there nonetheless. And then another one was there's a serial killer who OJ paid to go steal Nicole's earrings. At some point, Glenn Simmons.
Okay, well, where's the DNA?
Yeah, but does that make sense, or that?
No, but serial killers in jail tend to take, credit for things that they didn't do.
Yeah.
So
or that 2 exes see each other at a middle school play or whatever it was at Paul Revere in Brentwood. They have an issue because Nicole Brown's wearing a tight black dress, and then things kind of fall apart.
Yeah.
Like, inevitably, they do. Sadly, in most domestic violence situations, the reason those cases are important to prosecute is because they spiral out.
Well, I was also reading that Ron showed up because there's a couple theories, right, that they were dating and that OJ caught them. But I read that Ron Goldman showed up as OJ was killing Nicole, and so that's how.
Yeah, a lot of people think that, right? He was returning the glasses.
The glasses, her mom's glasses.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't think we'll ever have a case like this.
Well, that's what was presented, that he took the glasses. But again, the prosecution had said, I think he went with his work uniform.
Right.
But he was in different clothes. They said he was in his waiter uniform, which was like a white button down or something, and he was found in jeans and sneakers.
Like the mom had left the glasses or whatnot. So I don't know. I think it's really tragic, but it made for incredible TV. I mean, again, here we are. I mean, what was the show with that they recently made? It was like a docuseries.
Oh, the People versus OJ.
Oh, it was amazing.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. What's that actress? I'm really bad with names. That played Marsha Clark.
Yes.
She was phenomenal. She did such a great job.
I'm going to not remember her name now.
Yeah, but like
definitely
I see her
worth watching
face.
If you haven't seen it.
Yes, please watch it if you have any interest in the trial. I thought they did a really good job depicting just sort of like the step-by-step of what actually took place in trial, before and after.
And they even shot it in CCB.
Oh, they did?
Yeah, they did. It was in the Clara Shortridge Foltz Criminal Justice Center, which is where the trial took place.
There you go.
I've been there countless times.
Yeah, there you go. A stone's throw away from where we're sitting right now.
Yeah.
So final thoughts on OJ's interview. We talked about this very briefly in the beginning. Interview, Had I Done It, and the book. What do you guys think? Right. Well, let's talk about the double jeopardy rule. So even if he, decides to one day confess and say, I did it, and this is how I did it, it's done. He can't be prosecuted.
Ashley Judd, double jeopardy. I think she ends up killing her husband twice.
So what were your thoughts when you heard his interview? Have you heard it? Because it's kind of.
I was like.
No, you should listen to it.
It's just trash TV at that point, I think.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's shameful. I mean, at the end of the day, this is someone's daughter. This is someone's son.
Mother of his children.
Yeah.
Those poor kids. I mean,
right?
They were in the condo.
Their dad writes a book, If I Did It.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're glad that he did get some criminal justice for a robbery. So
the 33 years for stealing his own memorabilia.
Yeah. So, obviously, I don't necessarily think he deserved the 33 years for that, but he got...
he got something.
Yeah.
Well, he also hasn't paid, correct me if I'm wrong, he hasn't paid the civil
Well, he moved to Florida, where I
his
guess the
assets
laws
are protected.
they protect you from out-of-state judgments. So,
yeah.
Those Florida...
Didn't the proceeds of his book kind of take care of it?
I don't know. My understanding is that the Goldmans, at least what they said publicly, is they've received just a fraction of what they're owed. Because imagine, this is judgment, interest is racking up, so,
Had he done it? I mean, incredible. I'm sure we'll be talking about this more. We talked about this in some of our lives. We do Instagram lives every week on Wednesday, so tune in if you don't. But, I'm sure this is going to come up. I'm sure we'll hear from OJ again. He pops up every few years with some kind of a crazy interview.
Some theatrics.
Some kind of a show. But thank you so much for joining us. I hope this was a good break into the podcast world.
Yeah, thank you, Anna, for coming. We'd love to have you back on another episode of LA Legal.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.